Hi guys, this is Jenny and I'm going to share an art journal spread I did for the Crafters Workshop using several of the 12 by 12 stencils. This is a pretty short video, so I'm going to try and talk through a good bit of it, and what I don't talk through I will just speed up and show a bit of music. A lot of this is pretty redundant and just kind of not as important, so that's why it's sped up as much as it is. It took me about an hour and a half to complete the whole spread altogether, but I did have a lot of drying time in between, so obviously it took longer than that. I had a couple pages that I had actually used to kind of clean off a couple other stamps and templates, so I just used that as the background and used a couple of pinks and oranges and yellows for with gelatos to kind of just get some color on the background. And I used a lot of water on this spread, which is probably why it took so long to dry in between times, and I did have a good bit of drying time. In fact, one of the drying times took overnight and I just came back the next day to make sure I didn't rush it. I have a tendency to do that, and then I wish I hadn't, so I tried to slow down a bit. So I didn't have any masking tape, but I taped the spine with some washi, and that seemed to work okay. It still shows through a bit, but it doesn't really bother me that much. So after I got everything kind of covered and let it dry well, I came back with this 12 by 12 stencil that is sort of open flowers and some circles around the flowers, and I used a modeling paste from Teresa Collins that I love. It's got a great consistency for it and thins out well and holds well, and so I just kind of centered it along the spine and used it across all of the stencil. So after I peel that up, you can see what's left behind, and I really didn't want to take away too much from it, but I wanted to I end up toning down the background a whole lot. I used some distress dauber here in it's the bundled sage color to make it not as sort of chartreuse of a green and yellow, to kind of tone it down a bit. And I do a lot of that. You'll see I go through several layers of gesso and sort of water and gesso to kind of really tone down that center part, because I knew what I kind of wanted to do. I used this other template, it's a doodling template, it's another 12 by 12, and I just used this one piece sort of as a border to kind of define this right edge, and there's sort of some kind of random polka dot things, and then these other dots, and I had them hanging off the edge because I knew I wanted to kind of draw attention to them with some ink later. So that is kind of what I did. I used an Avery L ink, which worked great, and I used my fingers for the majority of this entire project, and it was so fun. It felt really kind of getting back to it and kind of finger painting, and it was just easier. And sometimes, you know, the best tools you have really are your hands. So after I let that dry a bit, I used some water-soluble crayons and kind of just touched up a few of the centers of the flowers with kind of the coordinating circles that kind of underlaid it a bit to bring them out a little bit. And I go through this a good bit of the time just to kind of define it. I mean, I went through that, and then I go back again with this. It's not a charcoal pencil, it's actually a erasable Prismacolor pencil in a dark kind of blacky gray color. I think I end up going back over that a good bit more, but then I used some gold acrylic paint on a piece of this other part of the doodling stencil in just some circles and random places to kind of accent a bit of this sort of diagonal from left to right. It's Martha Stewart gold paint that's really nice. And this is where I really go back with that black colored pencil. And I wanted to draw attention to those, you know, lines and give it a little bit of shadow without taking away too much of the kind of whitewash of it. And I really go through It seems like a long process to do that, and then I use a blending stub to kind of just to kind of blend it in a bit. If I had had a charcoal pencil, or maybe I really didn't want to use a like a pit marker, a pit pen, or anything else that would be too dark. I was a little bit wary of that. So this was a good good sort of middle ground, and I used this stub to blend it out a good bit. And there you can see I kind of skipped over a bit of that because it was really boring. So I got a lot of that colored in a good bit darker, and then I go back in and tone it down with some gesso and water. And I had just had gesso in one of those little little pans, and then water in another one, and I really thinned it out a good bit to make it this sort of light peachy color. I wanted it to have darker colors in the corners and then lighter in the middle, because I knew I was going to add something else that I wanted to be the focus. I used this as sort of a bronze kind of, I can't remember the color, it's a bronze distress stain around the edges, and just to highlight that. And then I used a very old but one of my favorites, Tattered Angels mist, that is just a clear white sort of sparkle color, just to add a little bit of sparkle, which is hard to see on camera, but you can see it. And then I did add some other white opaque mist from Studio Calico, and that is it that you can see there. I decided to add some of this this gaffer tape from 7 Gypsies that I have had for years and years and years. It's one of my favorites. I don't know, I mean, I use it I used to use it all the time, and I still have a pile of it left, and I just wanted to have a little place to put my other stencil, and so I wanted to have kind of a background place for that. The tape is not as sticky as I wanted it to be, and I wanted to make sure it stayed, so I put some matte medium underneath it. And then once it all got dried, I toned it down a little bit with gesso again, and then just touched up a little bit of that gold with my finger. And once that got all good and nice and dry, in fact I may have left that overnight, I came back with these. I knew I wanted to have a bird, but I couldn't decide whether I wanted to have a stamp or this stencil. I decided on this is the large 12 by 12 stencil. I've used the smaller one with the bird, but this is the flyaway stencil. And I used an archival black ink and a finger dauber, and did the whole bird in black on top of that gaffer tape, just kind of as a little bit of an anchor. And then once that got dry, I go back over it, you'll see, but I did use from this same stamp set, I used one of the little sayings about a bird, and I tried to stamp it at the top, and I kind of wanted to make it fuzzy, and I ended up kind of diluting that out a little bit with gesso, and had the bottom one be sort of the focus. But then I took some distress stain and put it onto an acrylic block and used it as watercolor to paint in the parts of the bird that are not black. I really wanted it to be kind of a bluebird, kind of teal, and really kind of pop against that background. I used another sort of layer of gesso behind the bird just to kind of really make it pop, and tried to fade it out around the rest of that floral stencil. And there I kind of covered up that other part of the text up at the top. I had a lot of dry time in this spread, even though it's not that complicated and there's not really many layers as far as mediums. It was just a lot of gesso and a lot of water, and anyway, so this is the this distress ink I used to watercolor it, and I believe it was the Salty Ocean and Peacock Feathers and one other color. I knew it wasn't going to look, exactly like feathers, and that was fine. I just wanted to add a little bit of, sort of bright contrasting color. And then I ended up using it a little bit there to kind of underline a couple of the pieces of that stamp phrase. And then I ended up just adding a tiny little bit of color and washing it out a good bit on the background of some of the flowers, just to, you know, bring that in a tiny bit. It looks very pink in the video, but it's actually a lot whiter and very pale, pale, pale peach colored. So one of the things that I do not do on camera is to go back, and I did a good bit of doodling around the layout or the spread once it got completely dry. I used some black pens and white pens and black and white markers, and really brought out a few of the sort of half polka dots on the right side and around some of those gold polka dots, and really tried to just bring a little bit more black to it and pop it out a good bit. So you can see the stills here in a second and the final product at the end. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you visit the Crafters Workshop blog and see all the fun new summer stencils coming out. And I would love any feedback, comments, or suggestions, and I really appreciate all the support. Thanks very much.